Hi, everyone. Hi, Sherry. How are you?
Hi, I'm really good. I really want to thank you, Andrew, for being involved tonight at our first Facebook Live of Deaf Stories. So we're going to be doing a series, and we planned to do that before the advent of coronavirus. So we had to change our plans. And for Deaf Stories, we were very fortunate to get some funding from Expression Australia to support us. So we're looking forward to what's to come. So before we begin, we'd like to recognise why we're coming together and the land that we all meet on. Where I am at the moment is in Victoria on Wurundjeri land, and that's the land of the Kulin Nation. We pay respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And also, Andrew, can I just get you to mention the land that you're on?
Well, you've put me on the spot, actually, but I do know in Sydney it is the Gadigalland land, but I live here on the Central Coast in New South Wales. I believe it starts with D, but unfortunately I can't spell that one out. So my apologies, but I do pay my respects.
That's fine. So I'd also like to recognise the deaf community because of our long history of the pioneers that established the community that we enjoy today. We have some wonderful organisations and advocates that I'd like to recognise, and deaf leaders, past, present and emerging. I pay my respects to them all. I'd like to also thank everybody who has joined us this evening. It's a really exciting moment for us to be able to have a little bit of an insight into Andrew's story.
That's right, and I'm hoping everyone's comfortable, has a drink in hand, and I'll share with you the beverage that I'm enjoying tonight.
Cheers.
And what are you drinking?
Gin and tonic. And it's actually from Scotland, from Edinburgh. It's called Edinburgh Gin, which is quite superb. It's a Christmas gin, which is beautiful.
Yes, I've had that when I was up in Edinburgh recently. Actually, I do know it is a good gin.
I agree. And I also have Dirty Tonic, which is a company that's made in Melbourne.
Well, the gin that I'm drinking tonight is from Archie Rose. Here's the bottle.
Looks lovely with that Sydney icon on the front.
Absolutely. You can see the Sydney Opera House printed on the front, and the reason why I really enjoy this particular gin, but that company in particular, they really respect cultures and art forms. And I think really it does symbolize a lot of what we're talking about tonight in terms of cultures and communities. So I thought it was fitting for me to drink this particular gin.
How exciting. We can enjoy our gin while you tell us a bit of your story.
Yes, and I'll be drinking it throughout the night.
We're very fortunate tonight to have really good interpreters with us. Do you know their names?
I do.
We have wonderful interpreters working with us tonight, and we also have captioners. And we're very, very thrilled to be able to make this as accessible as possible to all audiences, to those that may be students, those that may not be able to sign, or for those that are hard of hearing. So we have Julie Judd with us, and we have Daniel Haitley as the interpreters for this evening from Victoria. So we thank them both. Well done. If we're ready, we might start. So Andrew, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where you grew up, perhaps?
Sure. So I was born in East Melbourne, in Victoria, in St Andrew's Hospital. And it's actually not too far from VicDef, right around the corner, actually.
Right.
So my family, my mother is from Melbourne, whereas my father's from England. And he obviously came over to Australia and met my mother, and it was love at first sight, and they quickly got married. They decided to stay here in Melbourne for 2 more years, where I was born. And my father and mother then decided actually to move over to England and leave Australia. My mother and her family, they're quite a large family actually from Melbourne, the Peters family. My mother was one of 8 children, and all children were deaf. My mother was the second child, second out of 8, and there are still many family members in Melbourne, also some spread out into America. So a large, diverse deaf family.
Very diverse.
My father also comes from a deaf family too. He has a deaf brother. So really, my mother's side of the family, I'm the 4th generation person that's deaf. On my father's side, it's 3. But there was one actually missing, mind you. Going back a little bit further, we did discover some more deaf people. So who knows how far it actually does go back.
So we really need to do some more research.
Yes, well, my grandmother was sharing a story with me one day, and she was talking about being in a dark room once and finger spelling and signing. So there was something in that story that helped me work out there were more deaf family members. But
So tell me a little bit about your family, your parents. Do you have siblings?
I do. I have one brother who's deaf, and I have one sister who's hard of hearing. My brother lives in Melbourne. And my sister lives in London, over in the UK. She's probably watching at the moment, actually, taking some notes, making sure my story is accurate, perhaps.
Doing a good job, Andrew.
So yes, my family were quite heavily involved within the church. So it was very closed in a sense, the community that I was raised in. My family, my brother and my sister, the communities we grew up in were quite closed.
So you grew up in Melbourne and you moved to England when?
April 1966.
Wow.
I was 6 months old. And look, I didn't want to move to England. I already knew at 6 months of age, and you might ask why or how I know. I cried all the way traveling over to England. So that tells me I didn't want to go. But when I was actually in England, the school I went to, sometimes every year you would meet some new teachers, and they'd always ask, where are you all from? And it would go around the room, and it was all quite boring. Everyone was saying, I was born and raised in England. And I was the one point of difference. And I would say, I was born in Australia. And that was my mark that I was always very proud of.
The exotic student.
Indeed.
And you had other family there?
We did, yes. As I mentioned, my father has a deaf brother. My mother has multiple deaf siblings. And really, our families were proud sign language users. My dad's brother actually married my mother's cousin.
Wow, what a small world.
Yes, my mother's cousin was an Ashley from Victoria.
Oh, really?
You may know Peter Ashley in Torquay that makes the surfboards, my mother's cousin. So there's a relation there through the Ashley family tree as well.
All those links.
So yes, in terms of my upbringing, really there was a mix in terms of British Sign Language and Auslan, in terms of the languages that we use in our household, which was interesting because when I moved back to Australia, I met Robert Adam a few weeks actually after I returned back. and we were chatting at JSSC, and it wasn't until I used one particular sign, this one here, and Robert Adam was quite amazed and said, "Where's that sign from?" And I went into a bit of detail about what it meant. And this particular sign is when someone pulls up in a car, as an example, and they get out of the car and they're a bit disheveled. There's all rubbish in the car. You'll use that particular sign. Or someone's house, for example, it's a bit untidy. So you use that particular sign when describing that environment. So Robert then spoke to his father, Mac, and Mac couldn't believe it. He said, "I haven't seen that sign used in a very long time." And really, when I was in the UK, the language we used was almost frozen because we only mixed with members of the church. So we were able to really keep a lot of those signs in use and bring them back to here in Australia.
Oh, amazing. That sends chills up my spine. So your family was involved in the church, is that right? Could you give us a little bit of an explanation as to what they were involved in?
Yes, so we were a part of the Exclusive Brethren, or EB, Christian Church. I just noticed my computer, the screen's turned off, so I was just making sure I was still connected with you all. So the Exclusive Brethren Christian Church is a Pentecostal church, and it's a unique church in that they remove themselves from the broader community and don't mix with others outside of the church. So really, there is a disconnect from other people that don't follow that faith and that aren't part of that particular church. So it's very insular. But the difference really, you might be asking or thinking, is between EB and, say, the Church of England as a direct comparison. So the Bible is a little bit different between the two denominations, and our church, the founder of our church, retranslated the King James Bible. So bits and pieces were retranslated. So there are some differences, and that's why they each have their own followings. And the Exclusive Brethren is quite fundamentalist in its beliefs and traditions and ways of living. And one of those is, if you're not a member of the church, you don't mix with our people. And an example would be at school. So when I was studying, I wasn't able to sit with other children in my class. I wasn't able to sit at the same table. I had to sit separately in another room to eat our lunch. We couldn't mix with others eating. And also growing up too, we had no TV or radio or any opportunity to go to the cinema or the theatre. So really, you don't have any connection to the outside world.
So yes, you were disconnected from the mainstream.
That's right. And, you know, people weren't allowed to marry others from outside of the church. You were only able to marry those within the church. So it was very insular and closed, and businesses were established and they were supported by members of the community. You would only mix with others outside if you had to. And an example might be, say, schooling. Obviously, I had friends that would invite me for birthday parties. I would always have to decline those invitations. I wasn't able to attend them because they weren't part of our church. Or some of my schoolmates would be chatting and they might be talking about something on the TV and they'd be telling me about what they watched. And that was my way of having a bit of insight into the outside world, having a peek over the fence, if you like, peek through the window. And another example, actually, when Prince Charles and Di got married, on that particular day, my grandmother and I loved the royal family. So interestingly, we're thinking, how might we get access to this? So we decided to go to a department store on that day, and they've got TVs, as you know, when they're selling them, shelves of TVs and washing machines. My grandmother and I were standing there in front of the TVs, glued to the screen, watching the royal marriage. I'll never forget that. And afterwards, the church members found out that many people actually did watch that, and everyone got disciplined, and they had to publicly apologize and really declare that sense of apology to everybody.
I wonder how the people in the church found out.
Well, someone was caught. They got in trouble. Someone saw someone else watching it, and then they, of course, fobbed to other members. And then it was like wildfire, and everyone within the Exclusive Brethren world watched it, but everyone had to openly confess if they did actually watch it. It was so weird.
I see. So being in the Exclusive Brethren, were you the only deaf family, or?
Yeah, well, in England, my family were pretty much the only family that were deaf. So my father, my mother, my grandparents, my uncles and aunties and cousins, and everybody else was hearing. There was one older couple and another older couple, but sometimes, I would see them, but really that was all. So ultimately, we only signed within that particular section of the deaf community. Of course, there were some hearing people in our church that could sign, not all of them. So sometimes it'd be gesturing, the typical thumbs up, and that was as far as a conversation would really go. There was no ability to have a really detailed conversation with other members of the church, only with those that could sign.
So in Australia, I remember Breda Carty mentioned in her book that she had published something about that. Could you go into that a bit more?
Yes, I've got a copy actually here in front of me. Well, how it actually started, this is probably looking back a while ago. There was an Exclusive Brethren business that made flour, baking flour, and it was called McAlpin Flour, this particular company. And through a connection, they were able to actually sign the owners of that business. And through that, they then employed a whole heap of deaf people to work in this flour business. There was a large amount of deaf people working there. And this was an Exclusive Brethren family. And then a lot of Exclusive Brethren people became part of that business. And really, that was one of the largest deaf communities of the Exclusive Brethren, and that was in Melbourne due to the employment within that business. But due to a few reasons, some conflicts, people left, and in the end, there was only a few, I think 4 or 5 families left, deaf families left. So it then meant my mother's brother and sister, as I said, siblings, there are 8 of them, 3 still are part of Exclusive Brethren marriages and families. The other 5 aren't. They left the church, and it was, I believe, it started with my uncle Graham, actually. Graham Peters left at the age of 21, and then a few years later, other members of the family decided to leave as well. And there was division, a split within the family there. And growing up, I knew of those uncles and aunties, and I grew up praying for them and hoping one day they would rejoin and come back. That's the part of our culture. You had to always pray and hope that those that have left have come back. Every night you'd have to be there praying at your bedside about a whole range of different things. And I didn't really know what to pray about. So I'll just make things up and say the same sort of narrative each night. Really, I had no spiritual connection to it, if you like. And it wasn't until a little bit later, really, that I felt I didn't have that sense of connection, and the church wasn't for me. It was just something I felt innately in me. There wasn't that connection to it.
And you said that you felt disconnected or not connected to the Exclusive Brethren. Did you try to leave?
I did.
I'm excited to know a bit more. I'm sure it's got a story behind that.
All right, are you ready? Well, I think yeah, give me a moment. I'm just going to have a drink first. I'm trying just to open my other computer screen so the interpreters can see me as well. So just quickly doing that. So remind me again. Of course. About leaving the church. So up into this particular point, I was right at the end of my schooling. I'd finished school and exploring what I wanted to do, for my future. And I was talking with one of my classroom teachers, and she said, "Look, I really think, Andrew, you should head off to Gallaudet University. I think it'd be great for you." But unfortunately, that wasn't a choice for me because the exclusive Brethren religion doesn't believe in university. And they believe that people that go to university are more educated, which then means they will question more of the church's beliefs and leadership in particular. So they don't allow people to go to university. So
Right.
primary and secondary school, you are allowed to, but those who did study prior to joining the church, their qualifications and studies were destroyed, and they were actually told to urinate on them or burn them, their qualifications and certificates.
Wow.
Interesting. So anyway, at that point, where was I? Oh, yes. So I knew I wasn't able to go to university. And I knew at that time my uncle, Graham Peters, I believe it was at that time he had finished. He'd graduated from Gallaudet University himself, and he was living in Texas, in a town called Big Spring. And one day, a letter arrived at home, and I saw that the letter was from my uncle, Graham. And I was curious, and I saw on the back that there was his address. So I wrote to him, of course, and in that I was thinking about it, and I thought, you know what? Maybe my uncle Graham could look after me if I do head off to America and study at Gallaudet, and that would mean me leaving the church. So of course I'm thinking about plotting this, and I wrote to my uncle Graham. And mind you, when I wrote to him, I spoke to my neighbour and said to them that I've contacted my uncle and I've given him your address for him to return his letter. So when you receive it, let me know with a wave at the window. And I also said a bit of a white lie. I said, well, the reason why I gave them your address is I'm trying to surprise my mother for her birthday. I really wasn't, but this was my only way to enable myself to communicate with my uncle. So it was 2 or 3 weeks later, I was getting a bit antsy, and I was thinking that he ignored me and he wasn't going to respond to me. But it was a few days later that the blinds opened next door and they waved me over, and I went over and got the letter, and I read through it. And Graham said, look, I'm supportive of you coming, but on one condition: you need your parents' permission first.
Oh, that would have been difficult.
Exactly. I was thinking, shit, well, if my parents knew I'd even contacted him or this was something I was wanting to explore, the answer would just be no. It was 2 weeks later, my mother and father approached me with really stern faces and said they wanted to have a talk. I didn't know what they wanted to talk to me about. And they said, why did you write to Uncle Graham? I was caught out. And I said, how did you know? And well, Graham actually sent them a letter, Uncle Graham, saying, I welcome Andrew over here to Texas, but he needs your permission. And of course, my parents were not even going to contemplate it. They said no. So that opportunity was lost. And then it wasn't, I think at the age of 18, just before I turned 18, actually, I was thinking again, how can I make this work? And I applied for a passport, obviously. I was ready at the age of 18. I wanted to have a passport, as you do at that age. And at the same time, I was heading to a travel agent and talking to them about particular options, perhaps a plan to go down to Melbourne, but stop off in Morocco first for a holiday for a week, and then off to Melbourne.
Nice.
And I was trying to, work out. I didn't know where my uncle David lived. I knew where my auntie Val lived, my mother's sister. And I knew at that time they lived in Bruthen, which is in country Victoria, just east of Sale. So, of course, I was working out then how I would actually get there, which meant a bus from the city to Bairnsdale, and then catching another bus to get to where I needed to go. So I had it all planned. I had everything prepared. I got the passport, and it was coming to the day, the night before my flight. And I packed everything up, had it all ready in the suitcase, zipped up, ready to go. Then my father and my mother, we had a few cars at home at the time, and one of them was a work car parked out the front, and it had some curtains on it, some sample materials, all different display items that you might show a customer. So I put my bags underneath that so you wouldn't see it walking past the car. So I had it all planned out. And it was the next morning. I woke up and I said to my dad, "Oh, I've got to head out for lunch today. I've got to go to the shops. I'm going to take the work car." My dad said, "No worries." So we took 2 cars to work. And when we arrived, it got to lunch. And I said, "Oh, Dad, I've got to head off for that appointment." And he said, "No worries." And I went then straight to Heathrow Airport and dropped the car at the car park there, just dumped it at the Heathrow Airport. And I got the train to get the train to Heathrow Airport. And at that time, there was the helicopters
Right.
that would get you to Gatwick Airport.
Okay.
So I had caught a helicopter. It was a large helicopter, dual propellers, and got off to Gatwick. And well, my home actually isn't that far from Heathrow Airport, mind you, and often I'd see them come over. And I always one day wanted to do it. So this is my last opportunity. I thought I'm not going to be back here again. So that's why I got that. And I checked into the hotel, and I was so excited to be there because I had never been in a hotel in my life.
Oh my goodness.
Never even eaten out, believe it or not.
Wow. What an exciting experience for you.
It was. There was so much for me to see and learn and observe. That I got my room key, was up in my room, and there was a TV there, which I was extremely excited about. And I thought, I'm going to need a bite to eat. So I went down into the restaurant and was shocked that I could actually pick something off a menu, and I was able to order a wine. I was really spoiling myself. And then after that meal, I went to bed. And before I fell asleep, mind you, of course, I watched the TV, and it was black and white back then. And there was a movie, Tarzan.
Tarzan.
Yes, Tarzan, with the romance between Tarzan and Jane and the animals. I was mesmerized. But just before I watched it, the door, I was thinking, I should really lock the door, shouldn't I? And I couldn't seem to lock it. I wasn't entirely sure. I thought, oh, don't worry, it's not so important. But I was thinking about it a little bit, and I thought I've got to get up early in the morning to get my flight. So watching the movie, and before I knew it, I saw the door starting to open, and I ran straight over to the door and opened it and peered outside, and it was my dad. And he was pushing the door open, trying to get into my room. And as much as I was trying, it was to no avail. My dad had his foot in the door, so there was no way for me to close it. And through the gap, I was saying, "Go away, leave me alone." And my dad was steadfast. He said, "No, I want to talk to Andrew. I am not leaving." And this went on for honestly about 15 minutes. And in the end, I just gave up and opened the door, and I said, "What do you want?" And my mother was there as well, and they instantly came in, and they were begging me and convincing me not to leave. And one thing they did was really use emotional blackmail. They said, "Andrew, your sister is distraught," and saying all these sort of things. And I felt a sense of obligation in a way. And I thought, how am I actually going to get them out? And in the end, I had no choice. And I thought, okay, I can't do this anymore. And I was ruined as a result. I packed all my things up and went back into the car. It was late at night. And I do remember driving back, and it was about an hour back home. And it was a really heavy, foggy night. And I remember looking out the window, and I was thinking, well, that's my future. Bleak, grey. I'd just given up. I had no sense of hope. I just became a good Christian boy from there on.
wonder how your father found out.
Oh, well, are you prepared for another long story?
Bring it on.
I'll keep it short. As I said before, I went to the travel agent to organize my itinerary and flights and what countries I was going to. And this place wasn't far from my father's work. And when he thought I hadn't really returned from my lunch break and he was trying to work out what was actually happening, he got a bit suspicious. And he thought, I'm going to go and speak to this travel agent. So he arrived at the travel agent and spoke with the people working there and asked, was there a deaf boy that had visited here before? And he was saying, I want to know. And they said, well, sorry, we actually can't tell you. And a few things back and forth. And my dad actually said to them, well, his mother's going to be sent to hospital. It's quite urgent. I need to get in contact with him. And based on that comment, they then decided to give him information and said he had bought a ticket. He was heading off tomorrow. They said they weren't sure which hotel he was at, but somewhere near the airport. So they knew it was near Gatwick Airport, of course. And my dad, of course, as part of the church, they're quite insular. They all knew what was happening. And each and every one of them made phone calls to all the different hotels in the Gatwick area. I know. And in the end, some of them were a bit too expensive and they thought, we won't try there. But they said, no, I don't believe Andrew will stay there. And my mum said, I know my son. He's got quite expensive taste. So call those hotels. And they called a couple of them and it wasn't until they got to the second one that they said, yes, he's here. And that's how they knew. And that's how they found me.
Oh my goodness.
If I hadn't stayed at a hotel, my life perhaps would have gone on a completely different path. Who knows?
True. So you tried to leave again. When did you actually leave?
Yeah, so that was 18, the story I just shared with you then. And I didn't actually leave until I was 28.
Oh, so that's 10 years later.
So I was married at that point. I had 4 children. Well, the fourth, my wife was pregnant at the time. And at that time, I was already church. There are 2 different particular rules, and one being, as I mentioned to you before, actually, the Princess Diana and Prince Charles wedding, and you had to confess in church. You had to see the priest, and there are local priests that you go to and tell them your particular sin or whatever it is you're confessing about, and they'll of course ask you 1,000 questions, and then they'll then declare that you have to confess your sins. Well, there are actually 3 different things. So it starts with that, and then what happens in terms of the next level, if you do something, you still confess, and the church would take things quite seriously and say, well, you need to stop coming to church as a result. So all of the church members will not speak to you for a period of time until you fix yourself. So you have no contact with the church during that time. And then once you're feeling at whatever point it may be, they'll assess you again and then make that decision whether or not you can return. The third option is a similar thing. And if it's too serious, you are removed, you are kicked out, you are excommunicated.
Mm-hmm.
And the exclusive brethren word is called withdrawn from, and our sign was this, withdrawn from. So withdrawn from, people, if they were withdrawn from, we'd use that sign and we'd say, "Ooh, Mr. and Mrs. whoever it was were withdrawn from." And that's always quite controversial and everyone would talk about it. And that means you are cut off. You cannot make contact with any members ever. And what actually happened with me at this particular time was I had to decide, I need to remove and leave with my wife, my children, and my parents. I'd gotten to the point where I could not stay. And if I didn't, I would be in serious trouble mentally. And really, that was my only option at the time. It was my last resort, ultimately. And there were serious consequences for me by making this decision. It meant I had to cut complete ties with my family, which is really tough.
Wouldn't have been an easy decision to make.
No. So December 24th, 93, I bought a TV and had it. Yes, and I had the VCR. And I bought a few different what is it? VHS? Yes, thanks. VHS tapes. And, watched a few
Old-fashioned sign of putting the tape in. Yeah.
yeah, watched some Disney movies. And yes, so on December, well, actually, it was before that, where I put the TV because we had to hide it, of course. So I put it in my bedroom in the cupboard. And there was a shelf in there. So it was hidden in there. We had the TV set up. And once you shut the doors, no one knows it's in there, of course. And I remember the first night, I thought, I'm going to show my wife. When we were both there in bed, I said, all right, don't lose your temper. I'm just preempting. I want to show you something. And I opened it and turned it on. And my wife, she pulled the covers over her head. And I said, don't say anything. Don't say anything. And then it was December 24th that I spoke with my mother. So with the church, every day you had to go to church, without a doubt.
Day.
Monday to Friday. Then Saturday morning and Sunday, 4 times, 6 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, wow. Totally engrossed in church life.
Exactly. And your life revolves around that particular schedule. And if you don't attend, people know. So you can't hide the fact that you aren't attending. If you're sick, then someone will actually come over to the house and make sure after the church session and make sure the family's okay. And then obviously you share then what reason it was that you couldn't make it. Where was I? What was I up to?
I was so engrossed, I've forgotten myself.
Okay.
The television.
Yes, thank you. So yes, it was 10 minutes just before, and I was on the TTY calling my mother and saying to her that I won't be coming to the meeting tonight. And she asked me why, and I said, I'm not coming. And she said, why? And I responded again, I'm not coming. And she said, are you sick? And I just simply responded and said, I'm not coming. She was curious to know what was going on. And I thought, I'm just going to hang up. And I said goodbye and hung up. 10 minutes later, you can imagine, knock at the door. Oh, of course, it wasn't a knock. What am I saying? It was the lights are flashing. And my parents didn't live too far around the corner. So she was straight over, and my mother was there at the door when I opened it. And it was really hard, this conversation. And she said, what's going on? What's happening, Andrew? And I stood as firm as I could, and I wasn't going to budge. I just stood there. And she said, what's going on? And I just said, I'm not coming. I've told you on the phone. I said it, and I mean it. I'm not coming. And she said, stop being silly. And I said, I've said what I need to say. I can't be any clearer. There's nothing more for me to say. And I shut the door. Oh, I felt so horrible. You wouldn't believe it. Shutting the door on my mum. Oh, it broke my heart. It really did.
Can imagine.
And it was after that, you could imagine how I was feeling. It's a big thing to do, big decision to make. And it was the next day, which was Christmas Day, 25th of December. I pulled the TV out and we watched it proudly. In England, there's always fantastic movies they play on Christmas Day. So, watching and enjoying it. But at the same time, I was just waiting for someone to visit, for the lights to flash the doorbell. And it wasn't until 5 days, actually, that the lights flashed and I opened the door and there was the priest that had arrived to speak to us. And I said, okay. I was still, again, they were asking, can I help? And I was just really non-responsive. I just said, no, nothing, there's nothing. And they left. Obviously, the conversation didn't go anywhere. And there was another 2 more times again, the same questions were asked. And again, the same responses from me. And the last time, they said, can I help at all? And I said, I've bought a TV. Are you satisfied? And this is what I wrote on the piece of paper, and I spun the paper with the pen on there. And you should have seen his face when he read that. And they were completely shocked, and I could see them talking. They pulled out the Bible and they said, are you ready to remove the TV from your house? And I said, no. And they didn't know what to say back to me. And they said, well, can we help you? What can we do? Please really reconsider your decision here, Andrew. And I said, okay, we'll leave. And they weren't sure what to do with that, but they certainly did leave. And it wasn't, I think, for another 2 or 3 days that, again, the doorbell rung. And I opened the door, and this time round, I had received a written note from them that said, we have met at the church, and we have agreed that on the principle of 2 Timothy 2, that you have to be separated. You can't be an unbeliever. Or, no, actually, well, what it actually meant was about you can't work together if you're a non-believer, and that's seen as someone sinning. So, and that was where it ended. That was where we were withdrawn from. And they said, can we talk with your wife? And in the church as well, as when a male is withdrawn from, his wife and children still belong to the church from their perspective. So they wanted to talk with her and find out if she wanted to leave me and divorce me, or what her decision would be. And, if she was a good woman, then she would stand for the church and divorce her husband for making such a decision. So they were talking with her, and, she wanted to divorce. So we had to go through the process of separation, going through the legal paperwork. And in the end, it was March that I left England in March. And just before I actually left England, my wife at that time was about 2 weeks. There were 2 weeks left before she was giving birth. And of course, I wanted to see the baby. So that was very difficult. But I went to America, and I went to my uncle Bruce, and met my uncle Malcolm there in America as well. I met Bruce's daughter, who was 6 weeks old at the time. And I had, a connection there. And it was a significant shock to the senses, the culture difference. Really, they weren't part of church life at all. And an example is, I remember we were sitting around at the table, and I was waiting for us to say a prayer before we ate, and everyone just jumped on the cutlery and started eating and putting food into their mouth. And I thought, oh my goodness, how different. I felt really strange not doing that. And there were a few things that happened like that were just completely different to how I was raised. And we were in Indianapolis, and both of my uncles were working at the deaf school there, Sampson Deaf School. And I went into the deaf school and had a tour and met so many different deaf people, all American, of course. And I was just amazed. It was my first time being exposed to the deaf community.
Wow. Yeah. I can just imagine this would have been a big culture shock. I'm thinking, Andrew, it might be a really good time for a break. So we'll just put everybody on hold. I'm sure they're itching for more, but we might have a short break. And we'll just hold on to that and continue it. We might just stop our video, but we'll see you all soon. for the second half. Hello, everyone. We're back. I'm just waiting for Andrew. There he
Hi,
is.
everyone.
Hi, you're back. Hopefully, everyone's had a chance to go to the bathroom and get a drink and relax again. And we're back for part two. I'm sure you're all very engrossed in Andrew's story, and we're going to continue that story right now. So, Andrew, we'll start where we left off. You were in America and you had a huge cultural shock, meeting so many deaf people. You'd left the church.
That's right. And of course, I was using ASL too. And I felt like an absolute idiot. I couldn't construct the signs. And you can imagine there were so many deaf people. And I went along to the Deaf Community Center, and there was a presenter, a Black woman from San Francisco. And she was just presenting in this beautiful language. And reflect on that. And I wonder how much I actually knew of what she was saying, probably 10 or 15%, I think. And it wasn't till, look, I was only there for about 1 week in America. And I remember too, when I went to my first basketball event at one of the large basketball stadiums in Sampson. And it's one of the biggest basketball centers. And I remember when I walked in, I'd never been in a stadium in my life, and it was massive. So many people there, everyone getting up to sing to the national anthem, something I'd never seen before.
And all of the glam that goes with that.
Exactly. And the emotion. And anyway, so it was a week that I was there, and that time quickly passed. And I went back to England after that. And still, I was wondering about my wife and whether or not she'd given birth. And when I was in America, there's obviously different stores, and I madly went shopping and bought a lot of things for my children. And when I arrived back home, I visited my parents' house. And when my mother answered the door, she was quite taken aback. And I said, I've just arrived back from America. I've got a few things here for the kids. And she took them, and she was very, very cold with me, a marked difference. And, I'd seen people, such as my mother's brother came, and they were really resistant to trying to, talk with me. And I felt like I was on the other side of that. I'd seen that sort of experience with other members of our family when they had left the church. But my mother didn't say anything to me about the baby. So I decided to write a letter that night. And the next morning, I sent it off to the priest's house. And I still hadn't heard anything for a while. And I was staying at a hotel for a week. I was still actually working, so I had to finish up with my work commitments before I could properly leave and move. So I got home from work on this particular day, and I saw there was a letter on the floor when I opened the door of my room. And there it was, the announcement that the baby had been born with a photo, and they said the baby was born a week before. And that really hurt, that my mother actually didn't say anything to me when I visited and dropped the clothes off for the other kids. But really, it was that bad that she wouldn't even share the information that I had had another child.
Your own child.
So I immediately wrote a letter and said, I want to see this child before I left. And I was leaving on Saturday. I was flying out. And I received a reply saying, yes, they were allowing me to see the newborn in the morning, 9 o'clock on Saturday. And I was flying out at 12. So I went straight to Heathrow Airport. I checked in, dropped my bags off, and then head back to see the baby. And as I said, we're only 15 minutes from the airport. So that managed to work itself out quite well. So I stopped in at the priest's house, and in the hall, I'll never forget this. I'll never forget it. In the hallway, I was walking down the hallway. There were about 5 different priests lining the hallway. And I almost felt like it was a military style intervention.
Wow.
And I went down the hallway, around the corner into the lounge room, and my parents were there with the baby. And the baby was in a bassinet, the ones that you can carry. And I instantly, didn't even make eye contact with my parents. I went straight to my baby and picked him up, and her rather, Carla. Carla, and I remember it instantly, just that connection and sense of communicating and developing that bond, instantly,
Beautiful.
and acknowledging who she was and our relationship. And when I left, my mother said, "You are selfish, Andrew," and that was what she said to me. And I was so taken aback that was what the only really thing she had said to me. So I gave her back and ignored her comment, of course, and said, "Thank you. I'm really grateful. You've given me this moment, and it's something I will never forget." And I asked about the other children, and they said they were all sick, so couldn't be here, and that was it. And then as I was leaving, they said they wanted me to sign a particular document that was to do with the house and signing over the house. So I did that and left and drove straight back to the airport, dropped off the hire car, and got on the plane. And I really remember it so clearly. Just seeing the coast of England disappear, and as we fly over, just seeing it disappear, and me getting further and further away from it. And that was almost me envisioning that was my old life, and it was quickly moving behind me, and I was moving on to a new life and new ventures. And
Wow, that
yeah,
is just amazing.
yeah, and I've got photos of that, and not that particular photo, but the moment that captures that feeling that I had at that time. And when I landed in Melbourne, I was already in contact with my auntie Val,
Mm-hmm.
and she picked me up, and it was a public holiday, and I arrived at her home in Dandenong. And I met some of my family, and that evening, Uncle David and Auntie Elizabeth came with their 2 children. I met them really for the first time, and my auntie and uncle, and it was just I didn't know them. I really, the only connection I had was talking about our families, families generations gone. That was our only sense of connection, because it was almost like we were new family members to each other at that point. And ever since then, really heavily involved with the deaf community in Melbourne. And I've got a funny story actually to share with you, Sherry. It was about 6 weeks later, my auntie Elizabeth, it was her 40th party, and the party was attended by many deaf people, and I met a lot of different people that evening. And then afterwards, we went to their house to cut the cake. And after the cake had been eaten and everyone was still chatting away, I was talking to one particular person, and we were chatting for a long period of time. And my uncle David was approaching me from the distance, and he said to me, "Please stop talking like a horse." And I think I had horse-like mouth patterns.
I can just imagine him saying that too.
Well, the reason being in the UK, lip patterns and oralism is so how they use the language. And I went to a mainstream oral school, so that was how we used our mouths. Obviously, we just literally spoke like horses, and the tongues would be coming out and wagging away.
That's so true, isn't it?
I never forgot that. So from then on, my mouth was closed. So sometimes I do it every now and then, and those old habits die hard, right?
So true.
So yes, then obviously being involved in the deaf community, meeting multiple hundreds of deaf people, and being exposed to the culture and community, and so many people would say, "I knew your mother; she was a naughty girl." And growing up, obviously, my mum was the complete opposite, the ultra conservative. So to hear that she was a naughty person really took me back, and it was great to have those different perspectives and connections with people.
How lovely.
Yes, and I worked at the Deaf Club, JSSC, at the bar, Jollymont. And, there'd be 5 Fridays a month. And that particular Monday was this Friday, the 5th Friday, which would be the shift I would work. And I loved it because that was my chance to meet so many more grassroots deaf people.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I remember, I think it was the second or third time, I then got used to feeling more comfortable behind the bar, and one guy came up to me and I said, "Oh, what do you want?" And I said, "Oh, what do you want?" And they said, you know what I want, you know what I want." And I said, "No, honestly, what do you want? Can you spell it?" And he said, "No, you know the type of beer." And I said, "No, come on." And I knew he didn't know. And he's like, "Oh, VB." So, I made him the VB and gave it to him.
Oh, wow. So you left the church and time passed and you moved to Australia. What happened with your wife and your kids? What happened then?
Yeah. Okay. Well, it was about 6 months after me moving to Melbourne. I really absolutely missed my kids. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to write a letter. So I wrote a letter to my wife and kids, and they responded and they said, "Dad, we miss you so much and we want to see you." And we had a few back and forths, and they decided they wanted to leave the church as well. And, I was wanting to make sure this was a decision they were comfortable with. And they said, "Yep, no, we want to do this." And I'd lived like a single person again. So I was getting used to that and thinking, okay, well, hang on, I'm living in a flat. What am I going to do? So found a house out in Glen Waverley. So a rental. And I thought as well, obviously I'm going to need a car. Thinking, how's this going to work? How much money am I going to need to spend? And I thought, it's worth it.
Yeah, would be worth it.
I bought an old HQ, a grey HQ.
A Holden.
Yeah, with the stick shift.
Oh, lovely.
The 2 bench seats. It was grey with the 2 bench seats. And I loved that car, actually. Got fond memories of that one. So I was ready. I was ready for the family to come to Melbourne. So I went to England again at Christmas time. And I arrived in and went straight to my wife's house, saw my kids again, and, didn't stop hugging. And the baby was 9 months old at the time, my daughter, and had grown so much. And that was a really beautiful time. And that was, at that moment, we needed to tell my parents. So I left them all there and I drove to my parents' house and knocked on the door. And my parents have curtains just behind the door, and I could see the curtains shaking and moving, and some movement behind the curtains. And then the door opens, and instantly the question is, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I'm here again just to let you know. I want to let you know. I've got something to tell you." And I said, "Well, come on. What do you want to? What are you here for? What are you going to tell us?" And I said, "Look, I want to let you know I've come in. I'm staying at my wife's." And you should have seen their faces. They were completely shocked. I said, "What's happening? Please explain again." And I said, "Oh, well, I'm here to see my wife and kids, and they're going to move to Australia." And it was 3 weeks to go. We were moving on that particular day, and I said, "Yep, this is what's happening." And I left, and of course, a whole range of different things had to be organized. But it was around Christmas time, and we then had to obviously pack and clean the house. We had 3 weeks to do all of what we needed to do, and there was lots happening, as you can imagine, during that time. It felt like an eternity. So anyway, the family then moved to Australia, and things progressed from there.
So you moved to Australia and you started to, I guess, look at your identity and do some self-reflection, I guess, about you being gay. How did you come about realising that? Just summarising, if you like.
Yeah, okay. Well, looking back, when my fifth was born here in Melbourne, I was excited actually because it was sixth generation Australian. Anyway, at that time, my wife hadn't told me anything until later that she was actually pregnant. So it came as a bit of a shock. I already knew at the time, our marriage wasn't working out, and I had these feelings, these inklings inside. I was trying to work out what this was meaning, and it wasn't until the birth, and a little while later, it would have been 3 to 6 months old, and I sat my wife down and just said, "Look, there's something going on here. I need to really explore who I am, and I need time to be apart from you. We can still live in the same house, but just be sleeping separately, so I can really explore who I am as a person." And at that time, I'd been exposed to gay people, of course, during the church. My time in the church, there was no such thing as gay people. It was forbidden. It was like devil's work, the work of the devil. And after a while, I really came to the realization that, yes, I am actually gay. And it was 3 months later that I sat her down again and said, "Look, I actually think I am gay, and what do we want to do?" And we both agreed to live in separate houses. So I moved, and I still obviously saw the family and took the kids on the weekend, or sometimes during the week I would visit still. And yeah, that's how that came about.
Wow. So you need a drink after that.
So yeah, at that point on, then explored a whole range of different things, and I was as gay can be, and I was
You were a friend.
21 all over again.
I can imagine.
And at that time, I was actually 31.
31 plus 10?
Exactly. Yeah, I was a bit older. But, the younger gay community, it was so different, that difference in generations or age. But anyway, that was my time to really work out who I was. And it wasn't until a little bit later, it wouldn't be until I saw my first sort of drag performances. And I thought, hey, this is something I want to give a go. Growing up, my mum was a seamstress. She made wedding dresses, and I was doing making dolls' clothes at the age of 8 for my own dolls. I was sewing outfits. So there you go. I think I look back and go, come on, I was gay, even.
Yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah, there were clues all along. And I think at the age of 30, I hadn't come out yet. And at my 30th birthday, my auntie spoke to me, and she's like, "I saw you when you were a young boy." And she kept saying, "You loved women's clothes," and all this type of stuff. And my mother told my auntie and said, "I'm a bit worried about Andrew. I think he might be gay." And my auntie was telling me this story in front of everyone. And I said, "Oh my God, stop telling this story. I'm not gay. I'm straight," at that time when she was sharing that story. But, it wasn't until I came out and told people, everyone was like, "We're not surprised, Andrew. It was pretty obvious." So yeah, and drag, as I just said, that was something that really piqued an interest in me, and I thought, something I might want to explore further. And there were gay parties where people would get together in Melbourne at the Docklands, out on the pier. It was Shed 14, as it was then. It's since been demolished, and you see these big
Yeah,
monstrosities being
yeah.
built out that way. And there was performances in Auslan happening. And I thought, hey, I want to perform in Auslan. So there was the Winter Days, which was a dance party. And I went along and I did and performed in Auslan. And a good friend of mine, Don, the both of us were going to perform in Auslan together. So I decided at that point, I thought, I'm going to perform in drag. I'm going to perform this as a drag queen in front of all these people. And that was the first time.
You haven't got photos?
No, I don't have it with me right now. I need to dig them up. But yeah, look, my friends, I needed their advice, and they dolled me up, and they'd never done drag either. And they were just layering upon layering the makeup. It was so thick, and had a great time at the party. And then on, I got more involved in drag, and I've performed at pubs, in the deaf community at particular events as well. The first time, actually, World Federation of the Deaf, the Congress in Brisbane.
In 99?
Yes, 99. The last farewell party, just before, actually, a week before, was the first International Gay Conference. And that was attended by deaf people all over the world. And I was involved on the organising committee. And, I still had my drag clothes with me in Brisbane. So I thought,
Yep.
why not? It's there.
You were set to go.
Exactly. So I got my outfit, and one of my friends from Germany, we both decided to get completely dressed up in drag, and I won the Miss International Drag at that conference. So, I was ready to go, and there was all these people there. Everyone was ready for the buses. They were then heading off to the dinner, and me and our friend, we thought, oh, let's go a different way. We won't go through the crowd. We'll go upstairs, and then there's a particular way you can get there by walking and then going down the escalators. So we won't mix with all the people. So everyone's there, right? And we're working out our way to get around everyone. So we go down the lift, and then all of a sudden we're out amongst everyone, and we're living it up. We're performing to them all, enjoying.
You were famous.
Exactly. It felt like that. And my uncle David actually was there, and Malcolm too. And as we came down, David just couldn't believe it when he saw me. And after that, he actually calls me, which he still does now, his nephew instead of nephew or niece.
Funny.
I'm his nephew, if that's the right way to pronounce it.
So do you still do your drag shows?
Oh, it's been a while. Isolation and all things happening, but that's been well before COVID. So yeah, my clothes probably do need a good clean, mind you, and whether or not they still fit me, I'm unsure. I've put on a few kilos, so we'll need to put on a corset, I think.
Oh, you can use those seamstress skills, can't you?
Yes, yeah, I still do. I still sew some of my clothes now, and but yeah, it was only recently, actually, in Sydney at the Women's Guild, which is a very exclusive gathering of women, and they invited me along to present and perform for them. So I performed in drag to all these deaf women, which was an incredible experience.
How gorgeous.
Well, the unfortunate thing was there was too many lights, so everyone could see the quality of my makeup, which I did not like.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, makeup's much better in a darker place. You always
That's
look good.
so true. That is so true. So we have about 10 minutes left, Andrew. So is there anything else you would like to share with our audience? I'm just thinking, You have a few photos, I think, with you, don't you?
I do. I do.
Oh, a young Andrew.
So I was 10.
So much the same as you did then.
I was 10 and 3/4. I was quite proud here because you can see what I've got there.
Oh, lift it up. I can't see it. What's that red emblem at the front of your top?
So it's the prefect badge.
Oh, school leadership.
Yeah, I was so proud of myself. I look back on it now and think, what an idiot.
Gorgeous.
I've got others, but one you actually might laugh about.
Is that you? Is that you?
Indeed.
It's not your mother or somebody else in your family. That is gorgeous.
No, it is me. I've got another one and a funny story attached to it too. Someone wanted me to appear in a calendar.
Right.
So they were fundraising for a group in Victoria.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
So hang on. So I said to them, I have to be the month of October because it's my birthday.
Of course. Of course. Oh my goodness, that is fabulous. So fabulous.
Well, would I return to performing as a drag queen? Well, all I've got to say is watch this space.
Well, I don't think I've ever seen you as a drag queen, Andrew, and I would like to see that in real life.
Okay, all right.
So you did mention that you worked in sewing, or you switched across to doing work in the deaf space, but
So I first started off in my father's business, which was he was an interior decorator. So it was curtains, blinds, light furnishings, soft furnishings, cushions, etc. So it was quite an exclusive market that we serviced in London. Lots of beautiful, stunning houses. So when I moved to Australia, I worked for a company by the name of Laura Ashley, which was in Australia and New Zealand. So it was the made to measure department, and it was all national in Australia and all of New Zealand. I loved it, but they were all hearing people that I worked with. I never had interpreters, so the only way to communicate was by written form. And one day I had to present about a new product catalogue, a pricing list that I'd worked on and established. So I had to present, obviously, to staff about this new product. And I organised an interpreter to attend this particular meeting, and they obviously interpreted, and everyone was amazed. They said, "Wow, now we actually understand you, Andrew." And really that was my experience in a hearing organisation. I lived in Melbourne at the time, so that was up until 2001, and then I got a job in Sydney. So I relocated to Sydney. I'd always wanted to live in Sydney. The beautiful harbour. It was such quintessential Australia, and I think Melbourne is quite similar to Europe in terms of the disgusting weather. I'm more of a sunny, warm person.
I love Melbourne, and I swapped from Sydney to Melbourne, so we did the opposite.
Melbourne. I'm born and bred in a sense in Melbourne. It's in my blood, but I say I'm a Sydney man now. But I worked as a communication guide and then also a policy officer, and now I work at the Deaf Society. And 2 or 3 months ago, I became the manager for support services across the whole organisation. So it's a big area. So a lot of work to do for me.
So far you've been working, how long have you been working at the Deaf Society now?
Oh. Well, I started in 2011.
Okay.
and I took a break for a year. Unfortunately, I had some issues, health issues with cancer, but I returned and started down in the hierarchy. But I must say, it was good. It gave me an opportunity to meet the community and reconnect. And then I've, made my way up into the management area and still have fresh thinking based on those conversations and connection I had with the community in those other roles. And it's so different too from the church environment in terms of not having any connection to my family or friends at all. All those ties were completely cut. So it took a long time for me to transition and create those networks and connections with a whole range of different people. And, I still do feel like I'm 21, I've got to say.
That's lovely. That's so nice, because when you were mentioning all the different aspects of your journey, leaving the church and moving, and I think that you've really now connected with your true self. You know who you are, but you've still got so much more to live.
Well, do you want the honest answer? I think I'm fucked in the head.
I think we all are, aren't we?
Well, look, I think I would say probably only a year ago, I started to feel more settled. And I just think for so long, there was so many things happening, so much chaos, and lots of challenges really with with children and family, and that sense of disconnection really, and not being able to see my family. And really, I felt it took me a long time to get over that and feel at peace, and I've really tried to do the best I can. But one beautiful thing, I think, in terms of having a conversation with my children a while back, about 5 years ago, I had a conversation with my children after them asking a series of questions as to why they had to move to New Zealand. And I had to be honest with them. I said I had three choices at the time, and the third choice was what was needed. And what you'd seen, I guess, the journey that I'd been on and the struggles I had, sharing that and more, of course. And in the end, they, after that conversation, I said, did I do the right thing? And they all said, Dad, you absolutely did. And that's what I needed to hear. And, at that visit, I brought a photo album with the children's photos that I had up until the point where they moved to New Zealand. And they loved looking over that and reflecting on the past. So that was really nice, that connection. And I won't forget that.
That's really lovely. We're now at 8:31, so it might be time for us to wrap up for tonight.
Yes, my gin and tonic, my glass is empty.
I've been so engrossed, Andrew, that I haven't even drunk all of that drink that I poured for myself.
I need a refill.
So is there any last comments you'd like to make, Andrew?
Yeah, I think really people need to be true to themselves.
Totally.
And if you're not true with yourself, like my experience leaving the church, I just knew it wasn't right. And then again, similarly, when I was exploring my own sexuality, I knew something wasn't right. And it's just about doing it. Everyone only lives once,
Totally.
That has to be your mantra.
Terrific. Well, thanks, Andrew, for sharing your story. I was absolutely fascinated. You could write a book, you could create a movie. I think that who could make a movie about you? I think we would want somebody to be a really famous actor. Who would play you?
I think Niall DeMarco would have to play me.
Okay.
I don't really look like him though, do I?
Oh, well, things change. Makeup people are in these high expended movies. They've got great skills. They can just about do anything to make anyone look like you, I'm sure. But again, thank you, Andrew, for sharing your life story with us. And looking on my screen, people are just enthralled, and I'm sure you can read those later. And if there are any questions that people have posted, are you happy to answer them?
I'll try my best. Yes, absolutely, I will.
Well, that would be great. Thank you again. And I would like to also thank Bradley Reporting for providing the captioning this evening. And I would like to thank Julie Judd and Daniel Haitley for interpreting. Our aim tonight was to make deaf stories live, accessible for everybody. So anybody within or outside the deaf community can enjoy. And we can all work together.
I'm looking forward to seeing your future stories and who you'll talk to.
Certainly have a few people in mind. And we thank our audience tonight for watching and for your support. Good night. Love you all.
Good night.